I was having a hard time in life about 13 years ago. I was in college, but I made a few really bad choices in roommates. This meant I ended up moving around a bit here and there during that period of time. I tried not to go back in with my parents for the longest time. I guess if I had, though, I could have spared myself a bit of hardship. Thing is, I didn't want to be a burden on them at all, not even paying for college. I tried to involve them in as little of my decisions as I possibly could, although I have no doubt they would have helped me every time. Before I finally did give in and move back with them, the last place I moved seemed like a pretty decent area at first. It was a house rented by people who were also all around college age, although only one of them was actually a student. Everyone had their own room, and most of them generally kept to themselves. It seemed pretty ideal because of this. Although I did slightly know my roommates, I didn't know them very well at all. Something really strange that I still have a problem explaining happened a little while into the summertime. This was on a weekend when I got home from one summer class that I was taking at the time. I was living about 45 minutes away from the school at this point in a suburb. The classroom I was in the middle of the building and didn't have any windows. By the time I got out of class and then out of the building, I was shocked to see the drastic change in weather that had taken place. When I had gone to class, it was completely sunny without a single cloud in the sky. By the time I got out, though, it was a completely different story. The sky was full of fast-moving green and black clouds, and even though it was only mid-afternoon, it was completely dark outside. The wind was blowing pretty hard, too, and who knew how much worse it was going to get. I jumped in my car and headed home, hoping I would somehow make it before the rain started pouring down. I didn't think it could get much worse as I was driving home, but the wind was blowing my small car around on the road. I watched as grocery carts rolled around in parking lots by themselves, hitting cars as lightning filled up the sky. Fortunately, it seemed it was just a lot of buildup at first. I was able to get home before anything really happened. By the time I did get there, though, according to the radio, we were on tornado watch. I have to mention all this because I don't think this would have happened if it hadn't have been for the storm. One of my roommates decided to have some people over to party a little bit during it. It didn't really bother me, though. The entire time I lived there, I basically spent all my time alone in my bedroom. A bit of noise wouldn't bother me, and there was no way that it would compare to the noise already being created by the storm anyway. I was in my desk chair on my computer, watching the storm, when I heard some noises and voices I didn't know out in the hallway. And that's when I opened my door and noticed these people going into my roommate's room. Well, my roommate had just told me he was going to have some people over to hang out and enjoy the storm. I didn't really care because of this, and was about to go back to my room. One of the guys stopped and decided to talk to me, though. I didn't really want to stop and chat, but he was polite, and I was a little too polite to try and get away as well. I'm one of those people that can easily be trapped into a conversation. After a while, he was called away to the other room to join them. I went ahead back into my room and locked my door. I always kept my door locked when I was home. It wasn't even a real lock, really. You could easily unlock it from the outside by using a screwdriver, or even just your fingernail to turn the little switch on the outside of the knob. It didn't take long before I heard a knock. It was weird because no one had ever knocked on my door for any reason. When I got up to check, it was the friend who had stayed back. He had a couple drinks in his hand and offered me one. Although I had plenty of my own alcohol, I decided to indulge. He asked if I wanted to come to the other room and join their party. I declined. I let him know I wasn't really good around a whole lot of people I didn't know. We talked for a few minutes while I finished the drink. Then he was called back into the other room. While I was sitting at my computer, though, I began to feel very strange. I can tell you I have a really high tolerance for alcohol. Sometimes I tend to drink more than I should, but I didn't have a single thing that night other than the drink the friend of my roommate gave me. Things went black for a little while. Then I was suddenly awake and looking around in my room. I found myself lying on the floor. I looked around and didn't see anything, though. Things went black again. I woke up once more, and the guy who had given me the drink was in my bedroom. He wasn't doing anything, though. He was just standing over me, looking down at me. I looked over at the door and saw that it was locked. My mind told me he must have unlocked it to get in the room, and it sent out warning signals to my brain. Before I could do anything though, everything went black once again. I couldn't make any sense of what was going on. In the few moments of clarity I had, I suspected he must have slipped something into my drink. It was the only thing that could explain what was going on. Even though I was totally out of it, I was scared out of my mind. When I woke up again, once again he wasn't really doing anything. He was sitting on the perch of my bed like a gargoyle, staring down at me. I looked at him and felt dizzy. I was confused. I tried to do anything, but I couldn't talk or move at all. It was like I was paralyzed. All I could do was black out again. I must have been out for a really long time. When I finally got up once more, I was able to move. This time though, the guy was not in my room anymore. I managed to get up to my feet, but I stumbled and fell and hurt myself. It was hard to move, and I laid there for a while. The following day, I felt like crap. I woke up when there was a knock at my door. It was my roommate. He told me he had caught that friend breaking into my room, going through my belongings. My roommate then threw him out of the house. That's the scariest thing that ever happened to me, not being able to move or even make sense of what was going on around me. I hope that never happens to anyone else. Back in high school, I used to hang out with some pretty intellectual kids who were also pretty artistic and such. I guess I was pretty smart too, but I was always a bit of a slacker in the education department. I had a good time talking to these people though, and we were all involved in the drama club at school. Even though I was the new kid, I found a group of friends I felt like I really fit in with. I never went to parties as a teenager, and I probably wouldn't have wanted to go even if I were invited. I wasn't the type who drank, and I didn't like being in huge groups of people either. My friends never went to parties either, so that was another way we got along. We did have little get-togethers though at night, but only between our group of close friends. We always referred to them as poetry readings, even though we never actually ended up reading any poetry. When I first got involved with these guys, I found I had a minor crush on this boy named Nick in the group. I had always been shy about my crushes though, and for the longest time I didn't reveal this to a single soul. Every time we were near each other though, I would get those butterfly feelings inside I'm sure you're all familiar with. Nick did work on set design, and there were times when late at night he and I would be the only two people left after everyone else went home. During that time, we would talk a whole lot for hours. I often missed dinner because I would get home so late after having our conversations. That didn't really matter to me though, because I enjoyed his company that much. Often, as the night got longer in our poetry readings, a female friend and I would be the ones that talked pretty late into the night. I didn't have a curfew ever, so I could stay out as late as I wanted. I really enjoyed spending those late nights talking to her. Plus, I lived really close to my friend Elaine's family's second home, and her parents allowed us kids to have our little meetings there. It was close enough I could just walk. This was a really weird night though. It was November, and we always got snow in November. This was quite the heavy storm that began falling though, even before I left the house. It was one of those ones that when you walked out into it, you couldn't see 10 feet in front of yourself. It made you feel isolated and sort of alone. I didn't mind walking through it though in order to get to the hangout with my friends. I got there a bit later this particular time than usual. I was looking forward to spending time with my female friend, but not long after I arrived, her mother called and summoned her home. I was feeling a bit disappointed because obviously she was my best friend and I really enjoyed spending time with her. Because of that, I began to talk to Nick instead. Nick asked me if I wanted to go to an upstairs room and watch the snow fall out the window. I, of course, jumped at the chance to spend some time alone with him. We went upstairs and we left the lights out in the room. It was unfurnished, as was most of the rest of the home. Nick and I spent a good amount of time there talking. I can't explain this very well, but it had a strange intensity. I'm sure most of you know how it feels being a teenager and being alone with someone you had a crush on. You expect something to eventually happen. Nick was staring me right in the eyes. He asked me if I wanted to see something. The way he asked got my heart beating real fast. I nodded at him. He lifted his shirt up. My teenage libido was pretty worked up, thinking that something intimate was going to happen, but that was quelled pretty damn quickly. As I looked closer, I could see Nick had a ton of fresh wounds on his body. He had welts and cuts, and it looked like he'd been tortured by someone. I asked him what happened. Nick told me he'd been tied up and attacked by someone that he met. It was supposed to be an intimate meetup, I guess, but it didn't turn out that way. Nothing sexual happened, but once he was tied up, they smacked him with a whip, stabbed him with a knife, and basically hurt him all over. When it was finally over, his date grabbed him into his car and callously dumped him off in front of his house. There were tears in his eyes while he told me this story, but I wasn't feeling the same. I was feeling extremely angry. I asked Nick who it was that did this to him. At first, he refused to tell me. Finally, though, he told me he'd met this person on a dating website, which he'd lied about his age on. He even told me the specific username. He broke down while I held him, but he tried to make me promise I wouldn't do anything. Later on, though, I went and created a profile on that site he had used. Before I could even try to look for the guy that hurt Nick, he contacted me himself. He asked me if I was into kinky stuff like bondage. I didn't know what I was going to do. I sat there and looked at the message he sent me. I sat there and looked through his profile. I thought of all the wounds he inflicted upon the guy I had a huge crush on, and I wondered what I was going to do. I wanted to meet up with him and give him a taste of exactly what he'd done to Nick. I could feel the anger in my stomach, telling me to meet this guy. Ultimately, though, I decided against it. I'm sorry if you think that's being a chicken or whatever. I didn't meet him because I know I would have killed him. That's exactly what I was feeling. I wanted to grab my father's gun and shoot him in the face for what he did to my crush. I've never felt more sure of anything in my entire life. It's not a feeling I enjoyed, of course. I rejected it because I didn't want to ruin my life by doing something stupid. Nick refused to report him to the police, and I respected his wishes. If you ever have the urge to kill someone, I hope you never do. It's a cold, empty feeling that will surely haunt your soul for the rest of your life. Trigger warning: physical assault. My story takes place 2 years ago in France. I was home alone in my small apartment, working on something for my internship that I was really stressed about. It was the beginning of the afternoon, around 1400 or so, I think. Someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone that day. I went to open it up to see who it was, only to see it was a person I knew. Let's call him Jim. Jim and I had actually slept together a few times a few weeks before, until he suddenly pushed me away without any explanation. We were still friends, I guess, but of course I was really hurt. Was I that bad? Had he gotten what he wanted and wasn't interested anymore? I didn't dare to ask those questions because I was getting a little bit attached. I preferred to just wait for it to pass, especially since we were bound to run into each other once again. Indeed, Jim had recently gotten a room in the flat of a friend of mine. The situation was quite funny to me. He had stumbled upon the ad without even knowing that I knew this person, and my friend didn't know that I knew Jim either. I was going to tell her about it in person when we met again in college for our midterms. I'd known I was going to see him again because of this, but I didn't expect to run into him so soon after he moved in, let alone a surprise visit to my apartment. I asked him what he was doing here. He said he was quite bored and just happened to be passing through. I invited him in, and I was a bit uncomfortable. I still liked him, and he had left without any explanation about his rejection before he moved in with my friend. We talked for a while about trivial things, but strangely enough, I still remember the main points. He said he wanted to show me a new kind of massage against my stress he had seen on TikTok. I hesitated a bit as I was still uncomfortable. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes." I sat on the floor and he touched my back for a while. I don't remember everything, except for at one point he wrapped his arm around my neck. Suddenly I thought, I can't breathe. Then I blacked out. Of course, the memory of choking didn't come back right away. It took several months after. When I came to, though, even without the memory, it was dark. I was still on the ground and bleeding. I don't even remember if I noticed the injury right away, but I had a large hole in my right side with many cuts underneath. The events are fuzzy in my memory. I wondered where Jim had gone and why I was suddenly alone and bleeding. I went to look in the hallway, but my keys, which were normally always there, were missing. I found the spare and looked outside. No one was around. Then I had my first stupid reflex. I'm hurt. I need to disinfect this area. I started to take a shower. After that, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I had nightmares of being tortured and kidnapped in the shower. Probably a way for my brain to try and warn me something really bad had happened. I looked for my phone, which I now noticed was also missing. I thought it must have been a dream or something, that's how out of it I was. I told myself, if I'm still hurt when I wake up, then this must all be real. It seemed logical to my mind in that moment. I think I may possibly have been drugged or something. When I woke up again, my mind was a little bit clearer, but I was still not totally back to myself. It was around 2100, I think. I was still bleeding profusely. I looked for my phone again and started to panic as I couldn't find it. I tried to calm down. I told myself it must be around somewhere. I just had to ask someone to call me. I tried to jump on my computer and message someone via Messenger. I had a hard time unlocking it. I couldn't type in the code because I was so groggy from being drugged. Luckily, one of my friends was online. He tried to call my phone, but no ringing was heard in the apartment. I think he figured out something was wrong with me because he called me on Messenger to see if I was okay. I started to give him details of what had happened, although I can't really remember what I was actually saying. Apparently, I told him, if you think you've been hurt, should you call the fire department or the police first? He got freaked out and asked me to explain what was going on. I was still confused, of course, but when I showed him the wound, I think he got the gist of it. Who did this to you? Did Jim do this to you? I don't know, maybe. I was still in denial at that point. Tom called the police for me. He couldn't come to help me himself because he was away in another city. As I waited for the cops to arrive, I began to realize I had completely fucked up the crime scene by touching everything to look for my phone, not to mention taking a shower and the nap, which probably should have killed me in retrospect. I still wasn't feeling any pain though somehow. The big hole in my side started to finally hurt when I was being taken care of by paramedics. I had to undergo surgery as a result of this assault. It took me several months to accept that someone had tried to murder me with a knife. I had a hole in my liver, a pneumothorax, and I was bleeding quite a bit. Luckily, my other major organs were not affected. While I was in the hospital, the cops came to take my statement and took Jim into custody. Imagine the surprise of my friend and her roommates when they found out the new roommate they got not only knew me, but was accused of robbing and trying to kill me. 1 week after the assault, when I left the hospital, the first bad news was that the cops had not been able to retrieve the recordings from surveillance cameras in my building. They had already been erased. The next day, the policewoman in charge of the investigation told me that of course Jim denied having been at my place that day. Since nobody was at the flat to confirm, they couldn't do anything. That's it for now. Go home to your parents and get some therapy. Yeah, great. Then I waited for a long time. I had to have the seals from my building analyzed for Jim's DNA. Without video or witnesses, it was the only way to prove that he was my attacker, or at least that he was in my apartment that day. It took a year and a half to get the prosecutor's verdict. No further action. No identifiable DNA other than mine had been found at the crime scene. Unfortunately, I'd probably destroyed it when I took a shower. So, there you have it. Can't pursue the investigation. Can't prove it was Jim. I don't have the memories of the assault itself. I don't think I'll ever remember them. I have no doubt that Jim did this to me though. I think if I ran into him, I would freeze like a rabbit in front of a car. Today, I'm much better, but I still suffer from PTSD. For a while, I couldn't drink any alcohol because the drunken feeling reminded me of when I was going into unconsciousness. Now I panic when I'm with someone alone and have trouble breathing. Most of all, it makes me sick to know Jim is free to live his life and to try to kill someone else. So I'm a fisherman. I had to go take a shit at about 2 in the morning. I didn't tell the guy on watch I was going out on deck though. Our toilet was a 5-gallon bucket on the starboard side of the vessel. So there I am doing my business, when all of a sudden I see this huge wave coming at us broadside. All I could think was that I was going to get swept off my bucket and sent flying across the deck with my pants down. And turds would surely scrape across my face right before my fanny pack style CO2 primed flotation device exploded. Just as this huge wave was about to sweep over me, the boat rolled and met the wave, sending a spray vaulting vertically high into the air. I was able to let out a quick sigh of relief before I saw another giant wave rolling towards us. I was furiously trying to get out of the way as the wave smashed into the side of the vessel. The spray must have shot 100 feet into the air above the railing. It was as if Poseidon himself had kindly offered to bidet my butthole. I furiously pulled up my shorts. As I turned to jettison my crap overboard and head back inside, I saw the largest wave I'd ever seen in my life, bigger than the last 2 waves combined. In a panic, I dropped the shit bucket and bolted back inside. I could feel the boat lurching in the storm, threatening to tip over. Luckily, after that wave passed, everything seemed to go back to normal. Well, at least as normal as it can be with the boat rocking about in the storm. It might not be the most scary or life-threatening, but the idea of getting swept across the deck into the ocean and being covered with turds along the way was definitely scary to me.